It's April 15th, 1920, in a cramped, poorly lit clerk's office in rural Virginia. The air is thick with tobacco smoke and the quiet, crushing weight of bureaucracy. A census taker, barely glancing up from his wooden desk, drags a heavy steel-nibbed pen across a sprawling ledger. He looks at two brothers standing side by side in front of him, Elijah and Samuel. They have the same parents, they eat at the same table, they share the exact same heritage. But in a split second, with a careless flick of the wrist, the clerk makes a decision that will surgically fracture their family line for the next 100 years. Beside Elijah's name, the ink spells out W for white. Beside Samuel's, a hasty, aggressive scribble marks an M for mulatto. Two siblings, born to the same mother, standing in the exact same room, suddenly codified as two completely different races by a local government worker who didn't even bother to ask them who they were. This wasn't a simple clerical error, it was a weapon. For generations, local clerks and census takers wielded ultimate unchecked power over human identity, quietly erasing entire lineages based on the shade of a person's skin or the curl of their hair on a Tuesday afternoon. The psychological toll of this administrative violence was devastating. Families were legally split down the middle. Some were forced to abandon their roots entirely just to survive, while others had their heritage stripped away without their consent. You might look at your own family archives, your great-grandparents' marriage licenses, or the digital census data you rely on today, and assume they represent cold, undisputed facts. You might think the racial identity handed down to you is an unbreakable chain of historical truth. But these documents weren't always designed to record reality. In many cases, they were meticulously engineered to rewrite it. As the United States prepares for massive, controversial category shifts in the 2030 census, bureaucratic changes that could drastically redefine what it means to be Black or Indigenous in America, we are watching history repeat itself. Millions of Americans are walking around right now, building their entire worldview on an identity rooted in a bureaucratic illusion. This systemic erasure has a name: paper genocide. And when you pull out that vintage document, trace the faded lines, and look at the official ink tying your bloodline to history, one of these is a lie. To understand the massive shockwave headed for the 2030 census, you first have to understand the trap that was set over a century ago. It's a concept historians call paper genocide, the systematic, intentional erasure of a marginalized group, not through physical violence, but through the quiet, mundane stroke of a government pen. Imagine being a mother in the early 20th century. You know exactly who you are. Your community knows your lineage, but when the state registrar demands your child's birth certificate, the category that defined your ancestors suddenly no longer exists, or worse, has been criminalized. Look at the chilling historical reality of Walter Plecker, the notorious head of Virginia's Bureau of Vital Statistics from 1912 to 1946. Plecker was a virulent white supremacist armed with state power, and he essentially waged a one-man war on paper. He compiled a master list of specific family surnames, distributing them like warrants to local hospitals, clerks, and schools.
His explicit, documented instructions? If anyone with these names attempts to register as Native American, cross it out. Reclassify them as colored or Negro. Overnight, entire communities like the Powhatan, Monacan, and Pamunkey were bureaucratically wiped off the map. Their indigenous identity was legally nullified. Thousands of individuals were shoved into a monolithic racial category that completely stripped them of their sovereignty, their treaties, and their ancestral truth. The psychological violence of this reclassification was suffocating. Families were terrorized into silence. They hid their traditions, terrified that claiming their true, complex Afro-indigenous heritage could lead to imprisonment or the immediate loss of their children under the draconian Racial Integrity Act of 1924. And this trap wasn't just a local problem, it was an American strategy. Federal census enumerators, often outsiders from entirely different neighborhoods, operated with a godlike authority. If a census taker looked at your family sitting on the front porch and decided your skin was too dark or your hair too coarse, your racial designation was altered permanently in the federal archives without a single question asked. For decades, Black and Indigenous identities have been forced into arbitrary boxes designed by the very people who wanted to control them. As we rapidly approach 2030, the government is once again redesigning these boxes, combining race and ethnicity questions in the largest data shift in a generation. But history begs a terrifying question. When the state redefines the boxes, who gets erased this time? Long before the clerks and census takers began weaponizing their ledgers, a completely different reality existed on the ground. A reality that the American bureaucratic machine has spent over a century trying to make you forget. If you trace the ancestral lines of millions of Black Americans today, the official paper trail often hits a wall of intentional obscurity. But if you look past the doctored documents and into the deep, untamed borders of early America, you find the Maroon Societies. These were hidden, fiercely guarded communities built in the impenetrable swamps, mountains, and forests, forged by self-emancipated Black people who had escaped the brutal machinery of enslavement. But they didn't survive in isolation. In places like the Florida Everglades, a profound, tactical, and deeply human alliance was born. Black runaways and indigenous peoples, most notably the Seminole, recognized a shared existential threat in the expanding American empire. They didn't just cautiously coexist, they bled together, farmed together, and intermarried. They formed a complex, deeply intertwined Afro-indigenous culture that served as both a sanctuary and an armed fortress. Imagine the psychological triumph of that existence. After enduring the systemic dehumanization of the plantation, these individuals reclaimed absolute autonomy in the wilderness. They became known as the Black Seminoles, brilliant tacticians and feared warriors who fought side by side with indigenous leaders during the Seminole Wars. Together, they staged what some historians consider the largest and most successful slave rebellion in U.S. history. Their identity wasn't dictated by a bureaucrat, it was cemented by shared survival, mutual respect, and spilled blood in the swamp water.
Yet, if you look at the racial categories handed down through the generations, this massive, vibrant Afro-indigenous reality is almost entirely absent. The U.S. government couldn't easily defeat this alliance in the swamps, so they eventually realized they had to erase it on paper. The complex reality of being simultaneously Black and Native was a direct threat to the rigid, white-dominated racial caste system the United States was trying to build. The system required clean, isolated boxes to function. It needed Black over here and Indian over there, with a solid, uncrossable legal wall between them. And to build that wall, the federal government was about to initiate one of the most ruthless administrative campaigns ever recorded. In the late 19th century, the United States government realized that military force wouldn't be enough to dismantle indigenous nations and their rich alliances with the Black community. They needed a more lethal, quieter weapon permanently codified into law. That weapon arrived in 1887 and was called the Dawes Act. The public premise of the law seemed bureaucratic. The government would divide communal tribal lands into private property lots and distribute them to individuals. But there was a devastating catch. To receive your land, you had to legally prove you were indigenous and have your name enrolled on the Dawes rolls. This is exactly where administrative corruption reached an almost unimaginable level. When white settlers realized that having their name on that piece of paper meant getting free, valuable land, the system was immediately hijacked. White citizens with no drop of indigenous blood or cultural connection to the tribes blatantly began bribing government agents. For a mere $5, a trivial amount at the time, a clerk would forge a white man's genealogy and officially register him as a full-blood Indian. This is why, to this day, historians call these people the $5 Indians. But while indigenous identity was literally being sold for gold coins, on the other side of the counter, a brutal erasure was taking place. Afro-indigenous people, those whose families had fought in the Seminole Wars, who spoke the native languages, who bled and survived on those exact lands for generations, were systematically rejected. When an individual with dark skin or African features presented themselves to the commission, government agents rigidly classified them as freedmen or simply black, refusing to record their indigenous ancestry. This wasn't just identity theft, it was the largest, most surgical transfer of generational wealth ever documented in the country's history. By rewriting who was who on paper, the government stripped millions of acres of resource-rich land from the hands of Afro-indigenous communities and handed it directly to white families who had bought their identities. If you've ever looked at your own family tree or at the results of a DNA test and felt like pages were ripped out of your history, leave a comment down below. How many of us today are basing our identity, our pride, and our heritage on a document that, in the past, was bought, sold, or maliciously altered by some random bureaucrat? Thousands of Black Americans today are told that the Indian blood in their families is just a myth, an urban legend told by grandparents. But the records show a much darker truth. It's not a myth, it was paper murder. And the scars of that erasure are about to be exposed again.
We now live in an era of revelations. For centuries, paper was the sole arbiter of truth. If the 1920 or 1930 census clerk said your family was a single race, completely erasing your rich indigenous or black heritage, that was the legal reality your descendants had to live with. The state decided that ink was thicker than blood. But modern technology is shattering that monopoly. Today, millions of Americans are sending their DNA to labs and receiving undeniable scientific data that directly contradicts the boxes checked by the government a century ago. The visceral shock of opening a mobile app and seeing a significant percentage of Native American or Indigenous America's ancestry when your family's official records said something completely different is sparking a national identity crisis. But above all, it is sparking a powerful renaissance. Science is finally proving what oral traditions and family elders whispered in secret for generations. Paper erasure didn't eliminate the bloodline, it just buried it in dusty archives. Bureaucratic violence tried to divide Afro-indigenous peoples, but the genetic code kept the record intact. As we rapidly approach the 2030 census, with the U.S. government once again preparing to alter, combine, and redefine racial and ethnic categories in the largest structural shift in decades, we need to look at the past as a critical warning. How will we fill out these new forms? Who is designing the labels this time? These changes in census categories could offer an unprecedented opportunity to finally correct these historical wrongs, allowing the complexity of true Afro-indigenous identity to be recognized. Or, if we aren't careful, they could create new bureaucratic traps that will erase our reality for another 100 years. Identity isn't something the state hands you on a piece of paper. Identity is the blood running in your veins, the history that survived oppression, and the truth you choose to claim today. If you've taken a DNA test, or if the elders in your family tell stories that official documents tried to hide, you are not alone in this fight against paper genocide. I want to hear your story. Leave a comment below about what you discovered regarding your true ancestry. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue unraveling these hidden truths of the system. And please, send this video to that family member who guards the old box of photos. Your history is so much bigger,
so much deeper and so much more resilient than any bureaucrat could ever write down.